I'm good. I'm going to go off and smoke.
And I feel like the whole argument kind of takes away from cisgender women kind of rallying together almost for a certain type of feminism.
Hold on. Well, you asked why this matters.
Yeah.
Why this matters. I'd like to give you 3 reasons.
All right.
And you might not agree with the gravitas of why this would be important. But
Can I ask also, why does it matter and who does it matter to? It may be part of your answer, but I think that's important.
Yeah, so I think the first one I'll give you will matter to everybody.
Okay.
And that's the truth.
That is the reason? The truth is the reason?
So that would matter to everyone. And that's the first reason I would give you as to why it matters. Truth.
So are we speaking in terms of like you're
I'm
dating
speaking
someone?
about the truth. I'm speaking of
No, you
the
said
truth,
3.
not your truth, not my truth, the truth of the matter.
In terms of dating though, right? Or are we just talking about generally speaking?
I'm speaking about that males can't become female. Males, like, that's...
Biologically.
They literally...
Well, I'm not even... Look, I don't think you can... I'm willing to grant that within the ideology, I guess it's you can change your gender, but I link gender, and it's irremovable from sex in my worldview.
Sure.
So in my worldview, a man can't become a woman, and a transgender woman is a transgender woman, but she's not a woman.
Sure.
Because to me, in my
Yeah.
worldview, woman is linked to sex, and it's irremovable.
I don't think any of us disagree with that.
Now, the second thing is that since it's a dating podcast, I'll relate it to dating. I think that one, transgender women have a duty to disclose to potential romantic partners.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Because one, I think it would be good for their own safety.
Yes.
So if you're a transgender woman and you're trying to date I don't like this term, a cis man, for your own safety, you should disclose beforehand so that they can choose whether perhaps for them they don't want to date a transgender woman.
Agreed.
Yeah.
For their own safety, I think they should disclose. But if we start getting into too deep into transgender women are women and this is non-negotiable, then it's like, okay, well, do regular women have to disclose to men? By the way, I'm not a transgender woman. So we get into this kind of murky territory where there's less of a duty for transgender women to disclose. They might even feel like, no, it's actually perfectly acceptable for me to essentially trick men into sleeping with me.
Right.
So I think they have a duty to disclose. And then also related to dating, what if I as a man don't want to date a transgender woman? Am I, if the narratives allow to fully manifest themselves as it relates to this ideology, what kind of social repercussions are there when I have a preference towards not dating transgender women, but if on a long enough timeline, it becomes determined, like if the greater, right now there's a massive culture war related to this issue, but let's say I'm in the minority one day, and maybe the leftists, the LGBTQ activists, they win on the culture war. And 90% of people are like, that's a transgender woman, and you can't ask them if they're transgender. And if you don't sleep with them, you're a bigot. And what do bigots deserve? Bigots deserve violence. Bigots deserve to lose their jobs. Bigots deserve... Bigots deserve all kinds of repercussions, both social and sometimes when it comes to violence.
Isn't that what transgender people have been getting for tens?
Sure, I'll go ahead and grant.
So the tables turn, and now we're upset.
Well,
basically.
hold on.
I don't want violence either.
Right, violence either way.
I don't think that's fair, but I don't think people should be subject to violence.
No,
for their dating preferences.
No.
But I could see some sort of scenario in the future where if somebody does have a stated preference of not wanting to date somebody who's transgender, if that is bigotry, if we're using that metric as bigotry, people are happy to enact violence
Aren't we on a slippery slope?
Against bigotry. And then so that's the second thing.
Well, hang on. Before you get into this, I want to...
The third point on this is laws. And I'll just ask a simple question on this, then we'll move on to a different topic. So the first is truth. The second is like dating, since dating podcast. Do you think that we should criminalize Say if you were a dictator, like, do you think misgendering, for example, intentional. So somebody refuses to acknowledge, so somebody's pronouns, it's a transgender woman, and my pronouns are, I want to be referred to her as a she or a her. But somebody ideologically differs from her view and thinks that's not a woman, that's a man, and refuses to use the pronouns and says you're a he, you're a him. Do you think that this should face, if used in certain circumstances, should face criminal punishment or some sort of punishment?
Not necessarily, I guess. I mean, it's hate. I mean, I don't know.
That it's hate? I mean, how's it hate? Okay, so go ahead.
You're saying they're purposely not using the correct pronouns, or they did on accident?
Intentionally
not using the correct pronouns,
but not in a rude way. You might say it's rude on the surface already, but not like not in a mocking or condescending way, but like in the same way that they would say it's a she, says he.
You're this person's, like, are you over this person in a place of hierarchy? Like, you're their boss and this person is...
It could be any scenario, but they're not like intention. When I say intentional, they're not intentionally being condescending or rude about it. They're just like, this is what I believe. I'm not saying it in like a snarky way. It's just like, Felicity, that's a she. But if she thinks she's a he, I'm not like, oh, she's great. If that makes sense.
If you're her boss, I think then you have an obligation to your employee to use the pronouns that they are choosing. If you're her friend or something, I mean, she can't really do anything or have any backlash
but
towards
if you're the
you.
dictator, if you were the dictator, right?
So that's already in itself a problem, but okay.
Would you pass a law criminalizing intentional misgendering?
Depends on who the law is for. Bosses and CEOs and people of power? Sure. I mean, they haven't...
Okay.
But like me and you, if I called you a he, I mean, I hope you wouldn't sue me.
No, I wouldn't
like
care.
That,
no criminalizing on this one for me. No criminalizing.
The mean streets of Santa Barbara.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God. Brutal.
It's crazy. It's wild out here.
And criminalization can be like a fine, or are you talking about like jail time?
Let's start with just a fine. Okay. It's a $500 fine to misgender.
No. I misgender people about, I guess mistakes.
Yeah, there's mistakes and stuff. I say no.
Clearly intentional. So here would be the example.
Still no.
The person says, here are my pronouns, and the person refuses to use them and says he instead of she.
Yeah, no criminalizing.
Intentionally. Should that be criminalized? Should there be a fine?
No.
Me and you standing on the balcony, I tell you I'm a he, you continue to call me a she. No fine. Me and you sitting right here on this podcast live, and I have said to this group, I identify as a he, him, and you continue to call me she, her, you're getting sued. That's all it is to it.
Oh yeah, but that's different, and that's different than like criminalizing. Then it's like you're in libel, slander. Yeah, you're civil.
Well, that wouldn't be libel or slander.
No, it would be. What would it be? But essentially that's a civil case.
Right. So
are
it's
you in
very
favor of
situational.
civil penalties for?
Well,
that's on the individual.
Also, in that situation, like, because it's a whole thing with IDs and passports now. Like, do they have to have it legally put on their stuff that they are that gender, or are they? Because that's, if it's legal and there's legal ramifications, then you could just change it back, like, tomorrow.
Why is sex on our, why at this point, or sex even on our IDs and stuff? We don't need to know if you're male.
Should there be
or
like a
female.
fine for misgendering?
I don't think you could bring it into law because, like I was saying, there's stuff with IDs and like people don't automatically just change those legal documents.
Okay.
Yeah, it's murky, but
Sure.
I think that there should be.
You can't get a fine for name calling.
Huh?
No.
What do you think?
So
No, I don't think there shouldn't. There
No fine.
shouldn't be no
What do you
fine.
think? No fine. Well, what about this? High school students. So they're classmates, right? That would be a new context. Should there be like maybe a detention for a misgendering, intentional misgendering, or should there be maybe if they repeat it 3 times, should there be a suspension?
No, I think it depends on the
That person
person.
knows that they're causing harm, so it's not even about the misgendering. It's about that you're intentionally trying to cause someone harm. So there should be a repercussion especially if you're in school.
Yeah, but you would just make the reverse argument that by them using, like, if it's just totally separate, maybe they're religious, you would be causing the individual harm because they're causing themselves harm by lying. If they think it's lying, if they don't think it's the truth, then you're inflicting harm on them.
It does no harm for you to say he, she, they, or them to a person. It just
I think then we're
his-
playing the victim.
doesn't.
There's that
For his
playing the
argument,
victim
he thinks
on
it's
that.
lying,
But
and people
then it
are
must-
against lying.
You can justify a lot of
but-
crazy shit if you
Exactly.
go into other people's business and go, you said this thing and I'm offended by it, which is what we don't like. I'm offended by everything. You said this, you're making me do this. So, yeah, no fines. Okay.
Okay, but
intentional harm is intentional
Yeah.
harm. Like she said, if you know that a person has stated to you, legally otherwise, I identify as such, what harm, whether you believe it or not, it doesn't matter. If they want to sit there and be a potato, let them be a potato. You're not eating the potato. You acknowledging that that person feels that way about themselves does nothing to you at the end of the day. It just doesn't.
So-
Usually, if you don't like something, you just get away from them. If
just get
someone's an a-hole,
yeah.
you should just get away from them. If someone's misgendering on purpose, just get away from
They
it. It's like
pineapple
dating.
on their pizza. You're not gonna.
So there's probably scenarios where just for like simplicity's sake, some people are really hard line with this. Like if I'm just not interested, like in like a particular case offending somebody, or I'm just not like, it doesn't, there's situations where I just don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I'd probably like go along with it just because like to avoid the situation. There's probably situations where like if you're a student in college and your professor's transgender, like that's probably like, you're probably gonna have to bite the bullet just for the sake of getting a good grade in the class, even if it's
Sure.
against your thought process. But like, I'm speaking, you know, outside of these specific instances, there are situations where, or not, rather not situations, but if we're having a conversation about the issue itself, and we're actually, well, is it a woman? That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the truth.
Yeah.
Whose truth? Yours or that person?
No,
The
I get what you're
understand
saying.
What
The
he's
truth.
saying. There,
Yeah.
to a certain degree, like we all have to live in the same society, and we all do, to a certain point, have to agree on what is the truth.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any different than what like she had mentioned earlier. If it's something you're just not in agreement with, or it's a situation that makes you uncomfortable, get out of it. Now, if it's like a work school situation, you got to learn to figure it out. Do I think it should be criminalized?
And
Probably not.
what
Yeah,
Brian's
but-
argument is that in the war going on between our society of people who are in agreement and disagreement, let's say he's saying someone's in school, let's say you have a super liberal principal, and so they're like taking the side of the student who's trans or using like different pronouns than they normally would. So of course, like you're at a super liberal school, maybe they're siding with that student. Whereas if you go to a more conservative school, they might be telling the other student like, hey, you're going through some sort of, like, it depends on the place you are in society. And like that is an issue I see long term in society, is that we have these two opposing views and it is clashing.
And how do we come together? How
By
do we?
admitting that we're all human and our genitals do not matter. At the end of the day, why do we even have, I'm not saying why do we have genders, but why is it, who cares? Like if you put in your resume, I shouldn't be worried about whether you're male, female, or what you present. You're a human being. And I think when we come down to making those gender distinctions, that's why we're at war. At the end of the day, we're all just humans. It doesn't really, this is just us classifying each other like, oh, I'm not going to respect you because the genitals you have don't match with your pronouns. At the end of the day, they're a person, their experience matters, and that's it. It doesn't really matter what they have down there. I mean, it just doesn't.
Yeah, no,
Or
no.
what they call it.
I would agree with that, but I feel like especially like in maybe a school or work situation, you're probably going to talk to somebody more directly. Hey, can you do this for me? Not, hey, she. I think that there's really only particular situations, and I think that's why he's asking. If you're a dictator, would you criminalize this in some port? And I think it's a slippery slope, because then it comes down to belief. Some people truly believe that gender and sex are the same thing, where people see the opposite. So how
Yeah.
do you criminalize that? And then what's next? Then is it religion? Then
Yeah.
is it, you know what I mean? So
You'd have to criminalize ideology on that one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what people are scared, because I think people who have that mindset, the they, thems, the transgender people, the non-binary, it's becoming more and more and more prevalent. And the people who don't identify with that way of life are, in my opinion, freaking out. Like, how do we navigate these LGBTQIA people? Just respect and love them just the way you would a non-LGBTQIA person. And if those situations arise, address them with empathy and love. This person says she, he, they, whatever. I don't really agree with it. I'll call them that while I'm addressing them, because that's how they feel. But at the end of the day, I'll go home and still feel the same way. Is you respecting that person going to change your mindset? Obviously not. So why not just give them that respect and empathy while you're addressing them, especially if you're in a professional setting. At the end of the day, they're just a human. What they decide to call themselves should not matter to you and what you do with your life.
It does matter to a certain group of people, though, who are
Exactly.
trying to maintain a certain order in society. And are they right? Are they wrong? Personally, I'm not exactly sure, but it does matter to them, because if these wars between the cultures continue on, it's just going to wreak havoc. And I think while conservatives have their own issues, I think part of the issue that they're having with this is that they see these people as having a very severe mental illness. And while they can respect them as a person, they can't respect the mental illness of it all.
So what do you do if a person has an illness? You disrespect this, and if it is in
I
fact
wouldn't
an
say you
illness,
disrespect them, but also you don't go blindly with their beliefs.
But if they're sick, then you disrespecting or not respecting their beliefs is not going to heal them. They're still going to.
I was saying earlier, you don't cause harm to people on purpose. However, some people on the more conservative side would be saying, well, they're causing me harm because they're being so mentally ill that it's becoming almost a hassle on society.
So do we sit there and say the same thing about obese people? They are
Some people
literally.
do.
For the sake of time,
do.
for the sake of time, I've got to move it on. We have